Our three children. We've talked quite often about our three children, but did not spend a lot of time identifying them. So I'd like to identify our three children here in this particular part one. Our oldest child was Bernard John Burns III. He is known also as B. John Burns, and he also is known as John. And he was born on April 28, 1956. Through his life, his major interest is music. From a young fellow to current, he's loved to play the piano, the guitar, and write his own music. This was apparent when he went to college at the University of Iowa, when at the end of the first year, he felt that he was in the wrong field and dropped out and followed a rock band for the next couple of years and stopping in cities to try to sell an interest in the music that he was writing. He found over the years that, several years, that there wasn't a great market and it was going to be very difficult. So he finally decided to come home, go back to the University of Iowa, and he earned a degree in law. He's currently works for the federal government, and he's a federal public defender. I would say, though, his greatest love, even today, is music, and he still writes songs. He has been known to have written over 5,000 songs, and he likes to entertain people. He'll work one night a week at different coffee shops at no charge, just to play and entertain people. So he's doing great. John married Pam Keener in 1990, and they have a child through Pam, a young daughter, Christy, and Christy has a daughter now, Haley. So John and Pam are great grandparents, and they certainly have a great time with Christy and with Haley. Our second child, Mary Burns, was born September 9, 1957. She was born in Worcester. John was born in Arlington, Virginia. Mary was born in Worcester when we came back to Worcester, just gotten back. And Mary's interest in her whole life is marathon running. Ever since she was a little girl, she loved to run, and all through high school and college, she ran in as many marathons as she could plan. And in most of them, she won. She was outstanding as a marathon runner. She's won races like the Drake Relay Marathon here in Des Moines. She's won the Mayor Daley's Marathon in Chicago in the women's division. And even today, she's running at over 50, and she recently won first prize in her age group out in San Diego. So Mary has done real well in running. Now, she also went to the University of Iowa and majored in physical education and got a degree in physical training. And she immediately, because of the weather, moved to San Diego. And she's lived out there all her life. And she has out there gotten 2 additional degrees from San Diego State. And she now is a professor at San Diego Community College teaching physical education. And so she's done very well for herself. And as I said, she still runs. She married Chris Prine in 1988, and they have a son, Bobby Darren, who's currently enrolled at the University of Southern California, Santa Cruz. The other daughter that we had, Susan. Susan was born on August the 5th, 1958, in Worcester. She was also here when we came back. And Susan is an interesting young person. If you have read all of my memoirs, you'll realize that from the day I was born, I wanted to work. And I made use of all the time I had available working. And as a result, I probably would say that I've worked every day of my life until retirement. And Susan's the same way. From high school on, she had a great drive to work, so much like me, that she wanted to get out and to perform. And she picked one specialty area, and that was in mortgages. And she worked for several different mortgage companies, got great experience, and she finally went to work for the Wells Fargo mortgage division in their home office here in West Des Moines, and rose to vice president. She did a great job. She was in charge of a large number of people handling the services of mortgage loans. This is one of the largest mortgage companies in the country. And so she has worked there for many years. She, in 1979, married Albert Axme, and they had 2 children. They had Stephanie and they had Andrew. After about 14 years, Susan and Hal got a divorce, and sometime later, Susan married a Stephen Morrison. And the Steve and Susan, at one point in time, decided that they would like to retire, and they were getting up in the age over 50. They had always said that they were going to retire at age 50, and I said that was crazy. Well, in their early 50s, they did decide to take retirement. Steve was a vice president at Wells Fargo Mortgage also. And the 2 of them, they have a beautiful home down on the Lake of the Ozarks, and they spend quite a bit of time there. And I guess for people who would like to retire early, this is great for them. So they're a great example of people who could retire and enjoy themselves. They seem to get along good. I might mention that Steve, to his previous marriage, has 3 children, Amy, Will, and Rory. And Amy is married, and she has already had a exceptional daughter who's exceptional in her capabilities. And she's only about 2 years old, and they spent a lot of time with her. And also, Amy is expecting another child in December, so this makes Susan and Steve were very active as grandparents already. So anyways, I might mention that Susan's children, Stephanie recently, in last year, in 2009, married Stuart Keisman, and they live in Chicago. And Andrew, her son, is enrolled at the house, the International House of Prayer in Kansas City. Both Andy and Stephanie are very religious, and they're fine. They really have a great background in religion, and Stuart does too. So the 3 of them have some very interesting background, and I'm sure that's probably what they're going to be leaning to as they get older. Stephanie has already graduated from Christian College in Chicago. So anyways, that's their family. Now I'd like to go to part 2, which might just explain a little bit about my family growing up. I've talked a lot about my 4 sisters and my mother and father, and thought maybe I might just summarize my 4 sisters. My oldest sister, Betty Burns, if you remember, she was the one that had the great love interest with Franklin Brenner at one time, and that ended. And after a period of time, Betty married John Hennig, and that was in 1957. And they had 3 children, John, Jean, and Patricia, and they lived in Puerto Rico. Betty died in 1991, and her husband Jack died in 1994. The 3 children now live in the United States. Carol Burns, that was the one who protected me from all the bullies, was born in 1925. And she spent her whole life with my mother and father. She was wonderful, and she really meant so much to the family, and she was with them until they died. My father died in 1962 at only 67 years old. My mother lived for many years, and she traveled and would come out to visit us out in the West, and this is Nora, and she would come out to visit us in Iowa and visit all of our other children and sisters and such all over the country, and she traveled to other countries, and she lived to be age 97, and she died in 1994. So that was Carol. After my mother died in 97, Carol went to live with my youngest sister Patricia, in Wilmington, North Carolina, and lived there until she died in 2003. The next younger one, and that's the one under me, and this is the one that was the one that giggled at to Ponk Saracen when he called to ask her for a date. And she married my best friend, Henry Kempton. She was born in 1931. And she married Henry Kempton, and they lived in Williamsville, New York, and they had 4 children. They had Allison, Brian, Christopher, and David. And great family. We used to visit them quite often when we would travel east. And Henry died in 2003. And Ellen had never remarried, and she still lives in Williamsville. And the youngest one was Patricia, and that's my little sister. And I didn't say too much about Patricia, but Patricia was a very important part of the family. She was born in 1933, and she married a Dick Thompson in 1956. And Dick died in 1996. They had 3 children, Paul, Mark, and Carolyn. Now, Patricia remarried in 2007 to Edward Mahoney, and they're living very happily now down in Wilmington, North Carolina. They've done a lot of traveling around the world, so they're really living well. So that's the family. I've talked about my children. I've talked about the family that I had, and I do that in all due respect because we're such a close family. Growing up with my sisters, and even with our children and our generation, we were very close. And I suppose someday you'll be probably hearing the words of my children as they begin to write their own memoirs. This is Epilogue Part 3. I would call it the pieces of the puzzle. After reviewing all of the different things that I've discussed in my memoirs, the actions, the activities that occurred, I began to wonder how all of these things took place and what would have happened if the pieces didn't fit in the puzzle. And I started to take each of the pieces and begin to look at them and just to wonder how important each of them were as I grew up. And I thought I'd review them with you and let you try to determine as to whether or not they helped me, because I have to admit I had a very active and a very interesting life, and I enjoyed what I was doing. And now in retirement and looking back, I feel everything fell into place. But what if they didn't fall into place? And I'd like to just throw these out, these different pieces to the puzzle, and let you decide what would happen if these pieces hadn't fit into the overall puzzle. And the first one that I would have is that I'd point out with the strong ethics that I was able to learn from my family, my father and my mother. From the beginning of time, it seemed as though we all worked together and we had direction, we had plans, and we worked together as a family. And I really feel that was part of this overall puzzle. The next one jumps to when I was ready to start college. And through a friend of the family's, I got a scholarship to Boston University. What would have happened if I didn't get that scholarship to Boston University? Would all of this have happened? Would it have been a different direction? When I went to Boston University, part of the scholarship was a working scholarship, and I was assigned to the statistics department. In college, I did terrible in statistics. It was next to principles of economics as part of being a difficult. But it turns out that my whole life turned out to be working in statistics. Statistics is programming and systems and computer work. And at that time, there weren't any computers when I started college, but it all developed into that. So the scholarships and the working were very important. Then I go to the next point, which is very interesting, and it's that telephone call I got from my old friend in Idaho, my friend Donald Snotty Caldwell, who I later found had it in for me when I went to OCS. But he called me and asked me, why don't you try to go to OCS? I had no intention of going to OCS, but it was he that got me thinking about it, and I did go to OCS. And when I graduated from OCS, the next piece of the puzzle is, where do I go? I could pick any school I wanted, and there are so many different schools in the Air Force I could attend, and I saw one that was interesting because I had worked in the statistics department, so I picked the statistics department. What if I had picked another field? Would I have wound up in the same field that I spent the rest of my life? Who knows? But I did go to statistics school, and imagine what would happen when you come back and find a 4-star general sitting on the desk in your room where you're trying to study your classes in statistics, and this general was inviting us to go to the Pentagon to work in the statistics area there and to work on a new computer that was coming in, a UNIVAC 1. How many times has it happened that a 4-star general is sitting on a desk at a class inviting you? It hardly ever would happen. And this was in Denver, Colorado, when we were taking the class. So we went to the Pentagon, and I spent 4 years there programming on the UNIVAC 1. The next big piece of the puzzle was after 4 years, I was going to be leaving there, and my old best friend, Henry Kempton, who was now working for a company in our hometown in Worcester, State Mutual of America, asked me to visit with their sales agency to see whether I might like a job selling and leaving the service. And I went and talked to them, and I didn't like what I heard. I didn't think I would make a good salesman for insurance. But they asked me to visit with the home office because they, at that time, were setting up a study group to study for a new computer, and they might like somebody with computer experience. And they did, and they hired me. And I spent the next 7 years working at State Mutual on their computers. Now, one of the first applications that went on the computer was a new business system, and I was the one that designed it, and it was new in the industry. And as a result, some people from another company, Equitable of Iowa, from Des Moines, Iowa, wanted to see the application. So they came to our company, and I was asked by our people to spend the day with these people showing them my new application. This is another piece of the puzzle. And shortly after, I had put my name in with the recruiting just to see what kind of activity there might be for a new job. And what happens is that these people saw that, and the people from Equitable of Iowa asked me to come out and visit, and they offered me a job in the same weekend to set up their statistics area, programming and systems area out in Des Moines, Iowa. And so I took the job, and I came back. And I think this is probably the most important piece of the puzzle was my wife, Mary. Mary was always a person who loved being in Worcester. We had gotten back after being in the Pentagon for 4 years, and she loved being there. The children were born and living there. Our parents and grandparents and all of these people were there. So it made great living, and she didn't mind us moving from Worcester as long as we got closer to the ocean. And here I am, talking about moving out to Iowa, which is 1,500 miles away. And yet she agreed to go. And we took the family and came out not knowing exactly what was going to happen. So this was another important part of the program, going out to Iowa and setting it up. So all of these pieces, I think, fell into place. And I think once we got there to Iowa, that we were able to settle down, and we did actually have a great life in Iowa. I think Mary even would say that it was a great place to raise a family. So once we were out here and once we got the job, things pretty well settled, and we were, for the next 46 years, living in Iowa. And we did get back to Massachusetts quite often, go to Cape Cod, but I'm sure it wasn't the same as if you were living there, for Mary especially. And I guess that almost completes the puzzle, except for one piece that I keep thinking about. And it's the piece of the puzzle that when I went and went to my controller and took an action that if he did not provide an advancement in title when my boss left, that I would ready to resign that day from the company. It would have been so easy for the person who I discussed with just to say, I accept your resignation, and we would have left. We wouldn't have had anything in the future planned at that time. But they did give me the title, and that went on, and that just about completed the puzzle. But there probably are more pieces of the puzzle, and probably more to come in the future. But when you stop and think about it, all of these pieces fell together one by one, in order to get us out here. And it raises the question once again, what would have happened if one of these pieces had been in the puzzle? I don't think it would have come together as it is now. So I leave that for you to think about, and this ends my memoirs. I hope you've enjoyed the points that I've raised, and hope that it'll give you some instigation to maybe sometime put down your own memoirs. Thank you.